Hello, welcome to a new, different kind of video on Howlander Gaming today. I'm Zonalfair and I like to test older PC hardware in newer games. There's a lot of older but still quite capable processors available on the second-hand market, and maybe you're wondering how something cheap might play PC games today. To that end, I'm going to be testing a Ryzen APU today. This is a combined CPU with onboard graphics abilities that don't require a discrete GPU. The CPU in question is the AMD Ryzen 2400G, a 4-core, 8-thread processor released in May 2018. Today this processor will set you back around 25 quid, and combined with Radeon Vega 11 integrated graphics, it makes a pretty compelling case for a low-power, low-cost gaming PC. A fun side note here, I actually ordered the Ryzen 2400G for this test, which is a 35W OEM part, and ended up receiving the 2400G instead of the 2400G. There's not a lot of actual difference between these processors. The 2400G is clocked a little higher and comes in with a higher 65W TDP rather than 35W 2400G. But other than that, this is near identical to the part I actually ordered, so that's what we're going to go with today. This is the first video of its kind on Howlander, and if you want to see more, please let Howlander Gaming know in the comments below. Anyway, without further ado, let's get to work. Here's a test setup for this machine. A Ryzen 2400G processor on a Gigabyte B450MK motherboard and coupled with 32GB of Corsair Vengeance RAM clocked at 2666 MHz. Officially the 2400G supports up to 2933 MHz DDR4, however I don't have any of that lying around at the moment, and the 3200 MHz memory I have access to is currently in another PC bench. But in terms of memory performance, we are pretty close to its rated maximum speed. I believe that this will make very little difference when it comes down to raw numbers. On integrated GPU builds though, I would always recommend that you put in the fastest RAM you can get hold of. These integrated graphics love fast memory and your games will perform better. However, we're close enough today that I don't feel this will make much of a difference. Unlike the Ryzen 3 1200 I tested over at my channel recently, the Ryzen 5 2400G uses SMT, simultaneous multi-threading, which will help with performance as well. It features 4 cores, 8 threads at a base speed of 3.6 GHz and a boost speed of 3.9 GHz, with the graphics core being clocked in at a maximum of 1.25 GHz. Comparatively, this is actually a little slower than the clocks of Radeon iGPUs in newer CPU parts, which make up for a deficit in graphics core count against the Vega 11 by being considerably faster than the GPU in the 2400G, but that's a comparison for another video. I'm going to be running through a suite of games and I can tell you there's some really interesting things going on with this APU. I'll get into that a little later though, so stick around. Anyway, let's go on to the games. First up is Grand Theft Auto 5. A 1080p normal preset with slides at around 30%. Grand Theft Auto was more than playable with a frame rate that stayed above 30 FPS. But couldn't reach the giddy heights of 60 FPS. Hovering in the 40s, this was a good experience that while it may not have been a particular looker, ran on the onboard graphics of a processor that cost 25 quid. My recommendation here would be to use VSync to effectively lock the frame rate to 30 FPS for a more consistent experience, but even without that look, Grand Theft Auto remained plenty playable enough. The Division 2 next, at 1080p low settings with 75% scaling and a 30 FPS cap, the Division 2 ran pretty great. There are a couple of instances of very brief stutter, but they came and went by so fast that I actually feel that it didn't really harm the experience. Running the Division 2 without a 30 FPS cap resulted in quite variable frame rates, and I wouldn't play without a frame rate lock as it was simply too inconsistent to really play the game. But cap it to 30 FPS and you're going to have a pretty great time on the 2400G and Vega 11 graphics. Bethesda's Fallout 4 ran pretty well at a native 1080p with all settings on medium. The 4-core 2400G once again held an above 30 FPS frame rate, with the occasional loading stutter when you entered a new area of the map. There were 2 instances where the frame rate dropped into the very high 20s. Other than that, it was a solid experience and more than playable enough. While we may be seeing 30 FPS-ish frame rates, it is worth remembering that this is a £25 chip with onboard graphics, and while it would be unrealistic to expect detailed card performance, what you actually get is excellent considering that this is all being done with very little power usage. Fallout 4 was also the first game tested today that was GPU bound in testing, meaning that the performance was held back by the graphics capability rather than the processor. Red Dead Redemption 2 at 720p was okay. Using low settings, the 2400G and Vega 11 managed above 30 FPS, although with the reduction in both resolution and graphics quality, it would be fair to say that it wasn't really a looker, but it was playable. Once again, the 2400G returned a decent result, and I didn't have any issues in the half hour or so I tested Red Dead 2. The fact that these games even run at all is frankly remarkable, and shows how good AMD's on-chip graphics capabilities, and they are leaps and bounds ahead of anything Team Blue can offer. AMD have heavily invested in this area, and it shows in everything that these guys make. Dying Light 1 was once again the same story. At 900p low settings, we saw again 30 FPS and above performance throughout my playtime with it. I feel like I'm becoming a little bit of a broken record here, but the numbers don't lie, and this video should manage your expectations on what you should be seeing in similar setups to this. Payday 2 running at 1080p with medium-high settings delivered, yep, you guessed it, an above 30 FPS frame rate and very nearly reached 60 FPS. Payday 2 is actually one of those games where I feel it should be played at 60 FPS, so I would suggest tweaking these settings until you can get those kind of numbers. Having played the PS4 version of Payday 2, I can assure you that those extra frames make a difference. So do what you need to and reach 60 FPS. The 2400G and Vega 11 will do it. If you play at these settings though, you're still going to have a pretty solid time. Dying Light 2 is next, and here's where it gets really interesting, at least on a technical level. At 720p low settings with FSR set to performance, we managed 30 to 45 FPS on those settings. But here's where it gets really interesting. While reviewing the footage, I was surprised how remarkably similar in performance the 2400G was to the performance of the Steam Deck at the exact same settings, and after trawling through my video drives, there's a really good reason why. Valve's APU0405 is so similar in specification, another 4-core 8-thread Ryzen based chip, so close to the 2400G that it really is no wonder that the performance comparison between the two is near identical. This obviously makes no difference in play terms, but I found it interesting enough that this was at the very least worth a mention. Outside of this tidbit though, Dying Light 2 was plenty playable enough and you're going to have a great time on this too. Saints Row 3 Remastered ran well. At 720p low settings we mostly stayed at 60 FPS, and I had a great time on this. Other than that, there's nothing really else to say here. It performed plenty good enough on the 2400G and Vega 11 and held to that 60 FPS almost all of the time. Frostpunk, a personal favourite of mine, at 720p low ran okay. As I've said in my testing elsewhere, Frostpunk is playable even at lower frame rates because of the nature of the game, and even though we only achieved mid to high 20s on the Vega 11, it was playable by virtue of it not being a Twitch game. There's not really much more you can lower these settings, and ultimately your preference will determine if the 2400G and Vega 11 is good enough here. I believe it is, but obviously this is subjective. The Witcher 3 Next Gen ran fine. At 1080p or low with a 30 FPS cap, the 2400G and Vega 11 achieved that target more often than not, and certainly what I would regard as playable. You could drop the resolution to target 60 FPS, but I feel that these settings strike a balance between visual fidelity and performance that I would recommend these are the settings that you should aim for. And finally, for the first time, Sniper Elite 4. At 900p medium low settings, Sniper Elite 4 is a near identical story to the rest of the games tested today. Solid performance that hovers in the 30 to 45 FPS range and plenty playable at these settings. I played this for around 2 hours as time sort of got away from me playing this, and I had a great time, so much so that I lost track of time. And that brings a close to the games tested today. Ultimately the question is, should you buy the 2400G? At £25 with excellent performance for its price in both gaming and general browsing, the 2400G is a very, very easy recommendation for anyone looking to just dabble a bit with the incredible AM4 platform. If money is an issue, you can simply use the Vega 11 onboard graphics for good results, or you can use it as a stopgap before you buy a dedicated card and a more powerful processor. Something like the 1660 Super would be a pretty great pairing with the 2400G. The best part about this though is the value that AM4 as a platform represents. You could build yourself a PC that will play most games, albeit at lower settings, for around £100 less if you stick to the second-hand market. It's no secret I am a huge fan of the AM4 socket. All of the PCs in my household are built on this platform, and I believe it to be the most consumer-friendly CPU platform ever made. It remains cheap, capable and very upgradable, and AMD's support of the platform have been exceptional. In fact, cheap, capable and upgradable. Also an excellent summary for an excellent processor too. One I would highly recommend if you're building on a shoestring budget. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thanks to my friend at Highlander Gaming for helping me reach more people and hopefully inspire you to maybe build your own. If you like this, hit that subscribe button And if you have a little free time, maybe take a look at my other projects over at my channel. I've been Zernal Fear, this has been the Ryzen 5 2400G, and thank you for watching. Bye bye.